Hello, we are live on University Radio Nottingham. This is The Big Picture with Felix Hawes. Joining us today, we have quite a powerful panellist. We've got the Chair of Labour Society, Sarah, with us.
Hello.
We've got the President of University of Nottingham's Debating Society, Owen.
Hello, Felix. Good to be here.
Good. Thank you for Owen for coming on for the first time. And I hear that he won a Year 7 prize for history. James is here, everyone.
Hello. Glad to be here again.
For On Demand, because he was such a popular guest on last week's show. As always, do message in. We can read out your questions and comments. We enjoy reading them. Sometimes we do get some very interesting things coming through, so do feel free to message. So the topics of today are Suella, Braverman's and the migrant crisis, and then we'll also be talking about COP27. Should the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak be going as he is now? Should the King be going? And our last topic will be the return of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. So our first topic then is Suella Braverman and the migrant crisis. So we've got, spoilers everyone at home, but we do have a pretty left-leaning panel that are not massive fans of the Conservative government, particularly the individual that is in charge of the Home Office. So let's first of all talk about the controversy that where you would all pretty much agree then with the situation with some of the detention centres. Particularly there's one in, if I'm not mistaken, in Manston, which there's been reports of a lot of overcrowding and the fact that Suella Braverman has not been filling in her paperwork to allow the refugees or migrants to go into other hotels. And in fact, it's being reported that Grant Shapps, who is Home Secretary for a grand total of 6 days, seems to have done more paperwork than Suella has. So what do we make of this? Sarah, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I think it's absolutely disgusting what's going on. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace. And I think that, the Conservatives say, oh, well, we're trying to change the system. They have been in government for 12 years. So it's kind of like they need to try and look at themselves and look at what they've done. I think that the attitude that they've promoted towards migrants is also completely disgraceful. They've changed the narrative into these people are desperate. They're really deserving of our help, but they've made them not only seem undeserving, but they've turned them into criminals. The language around migrants into criminals, I think, is absolutely disgraceful.
Owen, would you agree with Sarah's assessment there?
I love Sarah going straight in. No mincing of words. That was a disgrace. Liz Truss, is that you? That's a disgrace.
Is it comparable to the level of cheese that we export, or is it slightly worse than that?
Owen? Yeah, I'd really agree with what Sarah said. I think I actually love what Keir Starmer said in Parliament in Prime Minister's questions. He said, "If the system has been broken, who broke it?" And you're right. They've been in power for 12 years, and they claim that. Basically, their best case scenario is they're saying, we've inherited a system that was from Labour that we never changed, and we're only now changing 12 years on. That's the best thing they can try and sell, which is a mess for the whole party. It basically sells everyone else before them under the water. So yeah, I completely agree. I think it's a real mess. I mean, what happened in Manston is unbelievable. I think it was 4,000. I didn't get the exact figure on this, but I think it was meant for like 1,500 or something around that figure. So the fact that it, massive increase in what it was meant, it's just insane that that's been able to happen, and that I kind of want to know her mindset. Why was she not signing the paperwork? What was behind her doing that in the first place? Yes,
gross incompetence, or is it that actually is her ideology? James, what do you think to all of this?
Well, they're the contrarian in me. Wishes I could disagree with the rest of the panel here. I mean, I echo what everyone else has said. It is absolutely disgusting, especially the language that Braverman has used about migrants is, in my opinion, absolutely disgusting. Just using words like an invasion and stuff like that just encourages, like it does create an image that these are criminals, bad people coming in to do malicious things to the country, when a lot of them are just desperate people kind of thing. And I think with Manston Detention Centre specifically, I think it was made for 1,500, but that was like a absolute upper limit, and people were only supposed to stay there for like a couple of days while they were processed, and you get reports of people being there for almost a month, I think. And these centres aren't like They aren't like nice hotels for people to stay in. It's literally like blankets sleeping on floors while you get processed, kind of thing. These are awful conditions. But then you get like Tory MPs and ministers saying that migrants complaining about the conditions. It's a bit, I don't know what the word, but it's a bit much or whatever. It's a bit rich them complaining about it. Like these people aren't in good conditions at all. It's complete gross incompetence by Braverman. It's awful language, stoking all this culture war nonsense, which is one of the only ways the Tories can get support anymore, is by provoking this sort of thing. It's awful, basically, Felix. It's all doom and gloom here.
I'm not sure if it is incompetence. I think that there is somewhat an element of trying to make the system so unbelievably awful that it deters people from coming, although I think that is a fundamentally wrong thing anyway, because I don't think people would come unless they really needed to. So I think that is a fundamentally flawed approach, but I think that is the approach that's being taken to some extent.
Yeah. Interesting. I think just something I want to mention just on language that you were saying, James, is that like, even, I know you're saying it might be purposeful, but even from an angle of someone who's responsible for domestic security, there was basically a domestic terror attack it was a petrol bombs on a station. Yeah. Was it Manston that it was actually on?
I think it was.
Yeah, and you just think that there was a domestic terror attack. The Home Secretary then comes out and says, yeah, but the reasoning was kind of fair because we had an invasion. Yeah. It's just like, what? What has happened? Yeah.
An endorsement of a far-right terrorist that, of course, not that long ago, a far-right supporter murdered an MP, Joe Cox. So it's, there has been a lot of criticism, including from Robert Jenrick, who is in the Home Office as a minister, who would criticise Suella Braverman's choice of words. And there are other Conservative MPs, Sir Roger Gale, who is the MP. He is a Conservative, and he's the MP for where this detention centre is, and he has been to inspect the site and has said that the conditions are not good. Right, well, we don't have anyone representing the Conservative Party here, or anyone that would be supporting of Suella Braverman's policies.
Daniel? When you
Daniel, who of course had a birthday yesterday, so happy birthday to him. We don't have anyone supporting the government, so I therefore will pose to you that there are lots of people in this country that actually do support the tough stance on migrants. There are some polls that suggest, or for refugees, there are some polls that suggest actually that the government on this particular issue is actually on the side of popular opinion. What do you think? Now, you criticise the government's response, as many people do. What do you think should be done to end the crossings, or do you think actually nothing should be done? I imagine there'll be some routes, I've discussed this with you, of course, outside of the show, of making legal immigration easier. But what would you do to stop? It's almost going to be, 40,000? I hope I'm not exaggerating that number, but
I believe it is, 40,000.
40,000, we're just under 40,000 that have crossed the channel. That's way more than the previous year, 2021, which was already record breaking. There's obviously are elements of criminals that are making money out of desperation of people crossing. We hear obviously from the GB News wing of politics, there's a lot of Albanian criminal gangs operating. What would you do to solve this crisis, or what do you think the Labour government should do if they get in office, which does seem more increasingly likely every day now? Sarah, what do you think?
I think on the first point of the government reflecting public opinion, I would say that the only reason that they reflect public opinion is because they push this narrative of migrants being criminals and being shouldn't be and being undeserving. That is the only reason why there is such a dislike of migrants. And I think that if the narrative around migrants change, which it should do to reflect the actual circumstances of it, I think that public opinion would be very different. I know that that's not always the case, and there will inevitably be some people that would disagree with the amount of migration that's happening, which is still quite small. I would say that would alleviate quite a lot of the tension. And then I would say to the point about the crossings in the channel, I would say that one of our first aims should be to try and stop crossings in the channel, because it is ultimately extremely unsafe and kind of fuels criminal gangs. And I'm an open borders advocate. I think that anyone should be able to come in whenever they want. So I think that we need to make legal routes to come in so much more accessible, because at the moment people try and make it as difficult as possible for anyone to come over. So the legal routes need to be really accessible. But yeah, I think that a priority should be stopping kind of criminal gangs exploiting desperation and make sure that people can come over.
Owen, would you agree with Sarah's assessment there?
I just wanted to, Sarah, do you think that will be enough with those, with like making things? I find your point on narrative really interesting, but do you think then that making things just easier legally is going to be a main driver of that, or do you just to kind of to hear a bit more about your view?
Main driver of reducing
stopping
channel crossings.
it, yeah.
I think that. But yeah, I think that making legal routes a lot more accessible. So it needs to be so much more. It shouldn't be that much of a complicated process, to be honest. And to be honest, I think we should get rid of the process altogether and just have completely open borders. But I know that that's not going to be overly popular. That's my opinion.
Change the narrative on it, though, Sarah. Change the whole population.
But yeah, I think that the legal route should be so much more easier. And I know that's often an argument that's used to try and stop migration, that it is criminal gangs that are benefiting from it. Yes, that's so true. But I think if you look at how people are kind of crossing the channel, you would see that it's just so unsafe, and how many people lose their lives, and how much money they pay, and how much they sacrifice to get here. So, these people are really, really desperate, and they need our help, and we shouldn't be trying to turn them away.
Yeah.
James, do you agree with that? What would you do if you were...
Well, if I were Suella Braverman, I'd do a lot. But
what, resign?
Yeah.
Again? Yeah.
No, I think I agree. You need to make legal routes more accessible. That's the only reason, the main reason illegal routes are, so becoming so popular, is because the legal route is such a hassle and doesn't work for so many people. I think the government should work a lot more with France to try and deal with the issue on both sides. Apparently, I don't know where I read this, but France offered a lot more support for trying to deal with criminal gangs helping people across the channel, but it was denied by Braverman. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but that's what I've heard. I also think something that's not been talked about too much in the media is the fact that a lot of people are fleeing these countries because their situation in these countries is so terrible, and they're looking for a better future. They wouldn't have to if situations in their own country wasn't that bad, which is why it's so stupid, in my opinion, that the government under Boris Johnson abolished and merged the Foreign Office with the Foreign Aid Development Office, and cut foreign aid spending below the target of 0.7% GDP. I think you can't that is one way of, if you really do want to stop people from wanting to come to the UK, then one of the best ways of doing that is making the situation better in their home country so they don't want to leave in the first place. One of the best routes to do that is through effective foreign aid, which the government is completely ignoring and actively cutting down on.
And you could also make the point, as I think some are, that many of the conditions are terrible in these countries, partly as a response to the destabilisation of those countries inflicted by wars that the United Kingdom have got involved in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned France there, James. There's a lot of people saying, well, a lot of conservatives this would be, well, France is a perfectly safe country. Why don't the people that are risking their lives crossing the channel stay in France? What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know. I guess it is sort of an argument, but I guess it's also, if they want to come to the UK, they'll find a way to come to the UK. If they might have people might have family in the UK already, kind of thing. I don't really know the details of the France's immigration system kind of thing. So I don't know if it might be more difficult kind of thing to claim asylum in France, in the EU in general, than here. Maybe they just think England's a pretty nice place.
I would say to that there's absolutely no basis for that in any international law or anything at all. It's just a myth that's been perpetuated by conservative politicians.
Sorry, what is that?
The idea that you should claim asylum in the first safe
Yeah.
country.
For a real second, I thought you were saying that France is a nice country.
No.
It's a myth. Total myth.
I love France. But yeah, that myth has been completely perpetuated, and it's not an actual thing. So I think that it's disgraceful that's being used.
Yeah. Oh, go on, Aaron. Yeah.
No, I had some questions in my head that came up. I admit I'm asking lots of questions and giving little little answers myself.
That's absolutely fine.
Yeah, but I'm quite intrigued just because basically a lot of what's been said I really would agree with, especially the idea of what's happened in foreign aid. My first instinct is, well, why are they fleeing? And then thinking about, well, how do we basically stop them fleeing? The difficulty in that is that we can't expend all of our money on that, but I completely agree foreign aid should be way higher than it is. I completely disagreed with that being cut and that not being something that we have a dedicated, clear cabinet minister for. The question I just asked you two, just purely out of curiosity, is we've talked quite a lot about improving legal routes of immigration. I mean, I already know your answer to this, Sarah, but do you set a limit on how many immigrants you can take legally? Because if we do, what do we do then once we reach that threshold and once we have to turn people away?
Well, I quite like, and this is going to be very controversial for this panel. I'm going to say I agree with a former Tory MP.
Whoa.
I know. Rory Stewart said.
Oh, yeah. Is he?
Yeah, I know.
Love him.
He
centrist dad over
there. Yeah.
His point of view was that like there should be like all countries should have a like set up a limit that's something like 5% of population kind of thing.
3 million for us.
It wasn't 5%. It might have been 0.5%.
Yeah.
It was some limit of like every country needs to agree to take this amount kind of thing because like they're able to kind of thing. Because like you have such an imbalance with countries taking like refugees. Some countries are like absolutely amazing at it, taking a lot more than other countries.
We have one of the lowest, I think, in terms of
I don't think
Europe.
we're great. In many ways, I don't think we're that great. And like Japan as well is another country that like has very little compared to a lot of like other countries across the globe have like take a statistically a much larger amount. I think something like that could be preferable where you sort of spread it out kind of thing across the whole world. You come to an actual agreement about it. And then there is like a hard limit, but that's not like that's a hard limit for your country, but there is still like options, I guess, because the load is being shared across the whole world kind of thing.
Do you think that would work in practice? And what would you do, as Owen says, to the people that want to come to the UK? Perhaps they've got family in the UK, but the cap has been reached. Who do you prioritise? Do you prioritise people that have already got family in the UK? Do you prioritise what's the quotas on refugees to economic migrants? Is it different? Should it work differently depending on your reason for needing to come to the UK?
I mean, it's very much not a perfect system, to be honest. But
no, not really. There isn't really one, is there?
Generally speaking,
open borders.
I kind
Brexit
of
means
agree.
Brexit, Sarah.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of an open borders guy myself. Not fully, but I could be convinced. So it's not a perfect system, but I think it's doable. I think that's the thing is that you can get an agreement at least with a few countries. Maybe if we were still in the EU, these sort of agreements would be easier to form. But hey, that's a settled issue at this point.
Brexit means Brexit, as Felix said.
Yeah. And well, I imagine the panel don't believe that we did make a success of it, but we don't have anyone to advocate that view. Well, I think that we're going to come to the end of our first session. Thank you very much for those very interesting views on quite a somber topic regarding the amount of people that do lose their lives, as Sarah said, crossing the channel. Now, of course, though, as I think James mentioned, this is a tactic of the Conservative government to try and boost up their support, as they are still polling massively behind Labour. So they are, I suppose, hoping that this isn't going to be their Waterloo.
This is URN.
Hello and welcome back to University Radio Nottingham. We're live. This is The Big Picture with Felix Hawes. And we've had a message in from Lucy from Beeston, and she's saying she's enjoying listening and being distracted by ABBA while she works. So thank you very much for listening, Lucy. Keep those messages coming in and we can maybe ask some questions to our panel. So our second topic is on COP27, which is going to be happening in Egypt. Now, there's multiple different angles we can take with this, one of which, and who's going to go for the UK. One of which is, of course, our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who wasn't going to go and now is going. And the other person is the King, who apparently, according to Liz Truss, had a mutual agreement that he wasn't going to go. So much mutual that he decided to have his own summit in Buckingham Palace on Friday about climate. Now, I know that two members of our panel are not big fans of the monarchy, but we're interesting to see what they think of the king on climate change, and I'll be interested to hear what Owen has to say.
Not giving anything away.
James, let's start with you this time. Is it right that Rishi Sunak should be going to Egypt, flying to Egypt for COP27 when we have economic emergencies at home?
I think it's sort of important because the Prime Minister, like, he's not really going to do much of the negotiating himself, but I think it is important in the sense that it symbolises that the UK takes climate change, like, seriously, you know? And I think that is, like, the main thing about, like, these world leaders going to COP summits, is that it shows that this is being taken seriously, even though they're not the ones actively doing the negotiating a lot of the time. It shows that it's a serious issue that needs to be dealt with, because it is a serious issue. You know, there is very obviously massive like problems at home, which is why I wasn't that surprised when he said he initially wasn't going to go, and I kind of understood it. But I think it is good that he's at least making an appearance, because it does show that it is a very serious issue, which it is, that needs to be dealt with. I do think, I don't know, as you said, I am no great fan of the king, but I do think it's kind of weird that he's not going, because, like you said, he had an agreement with Liz Truss not to go, and then apparently Rishi, like, agreed and said that he probably shouldn't make an appearance. I don't really understand why, because even though not a big fan of his, he does do a lot for, you know, climate change awareness, that kind of thing. So I think there's no reason for him not to go, kind of thing. You know, I don't really see a reason why he shouldn't be there, as well as Rishi Sunak.
Owen, what do you make?
Oh, I was hoping you'd go to me next, James. Felix, God. Yeah, on Rishi going, definitely in support of it. I think, how do you prove that you care about something? You do it even when it's hard. You do it even when it's inconvenient. You know, you keep going. So I think we want to show that we're serious about climate change. We do it even when we're going through difficulties for ourselves domestically. So I think that's actually, there's a lot to be said about going even when there's an economic crisis. I think that's actually really important. And, you know, he does have Hunt on the case. He's been on the case for a long time. So I think there's isn't an actual sense of his real tangible need to be in the UK. So I'm fully behind that. When he said he wasn't going, I actually didn't think of it from the economic crisis angle. I thought it was more trying to play to his base of Tory supporters. I don't know if you'll pick up on that, Sarah. I feel like it'd be a point you'd make. She's got the notes, yeah. That was what it struck me as, was more, you know, with what Liz did with fracking, you know, with everything like that, of being relatively not too worried about climate change, not too worried about conservation, at least in the modern Conservative Party that we have since Boris, really. I thought it was very much that he wanted to show them that he cared about the economy more than climate change. But I'm glad he's going. I think that's a good thing. But on to the king, I think this is where it gets interesting. So for context, I wouldn't say I'm not Felix, I wouldn't say I'm a monarchist, but I do think we should. I guess it depends how you define monarchist. I do think we should have it. I think for the UK, it's better we have it than not have it. I think it's good to have a head figure who is apolitical and is central there, that isn't elected, that actually is above politics, because it shows us that ultimately politics isn't the be-all and end-all of our state. You look at places like America, where the head of state is so fundamentally political. The very top is about politics. There's something about having an unelected head of state where it's actually what are we ultimately about? Well, we're ultimately a country, we're ultimately a community, we ultimately have tradition and values and aims. And there's that unifying aspect that is above politics and supersedes politics. I actually think, in terms of stability for our democracy, in terms of stability for our country, that actual unifying force is really important. But I appreciate that was a big tangent. But in understanding...
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Felix. Just had to make Felix let me come back, you know. But in understanding that, I think you'll understand more of where I come from in this. Because my initial instinct was, of course the king can go. Like, I support, you know, COP. I want to see action on climate change. 100% I want the king there. Then I started to think about it more, and I thought, well, actually do we? In the sense that even though I think climate change is a pretty objective scientific thing, it is a political decision to support it. You are ultimately prioritising it over different things and different interests. And I think in giving the setting the precedent that the monarch can go to events like this. The monarch can have big international political events, that they can be there, they can show their face, they can actively advocate something. I think it can set a precedent I'm a little bit uneasy with, in the sense of, would I be happy if Charles came out and did something like this and advocated something that actually I didn't agree with, that I actually had quite strong views against? Actually, I wouldn't be super happy with him, and I would disagree with him showing Britain in it. So ultimately, that's what his job is, to represent Britain. If he's the head of state and going there and representing us as something I didn't agree with, at least in a big political sense. So for me, actually, the more I've thought about it, the more cautious I am about the idea of him going to COP. Just because of that reason, of the precedent it sets and what it would mean if he was, what it does to the monarchy, almost to have that political taint to them, not taint, but twist to them. But I'm ready to be taken down.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. Very interesting points. Sarah, what do you think? I know you're not a big fan of either Rishi Sunak or the King, but you are in favour of trying to tackle climate change. So what do you think to this? I'm
very much looking forward to disagreeing with you both, because you guys both kind of emphasise the symbolic importance of this, and Greta Thunberg said of COP26 last year that it's a PR statement. And ultimately, there's very little substance to these COP meetings. I think if there was actual substance and actual change coming with these kind of conferences, then it would be a completely different matter. But there's nothing. There's no kind of solid any kind of binding agreements. So I would argue that it's kind of the perfect thing for the King to go to, because it's useless and it's a complete PR statement. But then again, I agree with Owen's point that the monarchy, ultimately undemocratic institution. It's there in this case. They're supporting something that I would agree with, kind of protecting the environment. But as Owen said, that's not you can't trust that to always be the case. So yeah, there should not be any kind of we should not have any undemocratic representation sent to these kind of conferences. So I think that should Rishi Sunak go? I mean, I think it's useless. I think it's a pointless conference because it hasn't got any teeth. And it's not binding. And also, obviously, actually getting to Egypt is a huge waste of resources, which is quite ironic, really. So I would say they both shouldn't go unless there's something that is actually substantial and something that will change things, which I don't think will come out of this conference.
Again, another interesting take there. And I think it's maybe something I should point out, that although there was a lot of uproar on at least social media about Rishi Sunak not going initially, it is important to remember actually it is normal for the Prime Minister not to go to COP events. Tony Blair never went, Gordon Brown went once, David Cameron went once, Theresa May never went, and Boris Johnson went once. So it is actually norm for them not to go. And speaking of Boris Johnson, well, he is going to COP27. I'm sure they'll be pleased to see him. Though apparently he's not taking the same plane as Rishi Sunak. I wonder why that might be. Now, obviously, all three of you are not conservative, wouldn't define yourself as conservative, and probably, based on what you've said, don't believe the Conservative government are doing enough to tackle climate change. So, within the context of Conservatives, do you think Rishi Sunak is the best of a bad bunch? Bearing in mind Alok Sharma, who was chair of COP26 that was held in Glasgow last year, has criticised Rishi Sunak. Of course, he also was removed from the cabinet. Do you think Rishi Sunak is the best we're going to get on climate change, in your opinion, from the Conservatives, or do you think that actually, no, Liz Truss might be better with fracking? I don't know. Owen, what do you reckon?
I mean, bring back Rory Stewart, that's the... me and James agree on that one. I love Rory. I actually tried to find a Rest is Politics podcast for Netanyahu, but didn't get there. On specific, is Rishi generally... I could answer more your broad question of, is he generally the best person? On climate change, I haven't heard better voices. Is what I'd say. Maybe there's a couple, like you say. I mean, that guy, his job was literally to be the president of COP, so I can understand why he would be more clear on it and have a more outspoken voice. It's almost, if he doesn't, who will? in some senses, the truth is I'm fully focused more. I do still listen in on what the Conservatives are doing and who they have available, but focus somewhat more on who Labour's got. But in generally, is Rishi Sunak the best option we've got? For who we had in the running, I'd probably say yes, except maybe Tungenhat, is that how you say his last name? The guy who ran last time. I actually thought he was decently good. He was more centrist, more pragmatic. He's like you, Felix, a Tory we can, all like and get on with.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, he's not. But in that sense, I think there is other Tories I would go for if I actually wanted good governance and if I wanted pragmatic action, because I think that Rishi isn't taking action that actually makes sense, at least on a climate perspective. I don't think he is doing a pragmatic thing that's smart. I mean, I think, we talked about Labour doing a good plan. I think Labour's plan to, really heavily invest in green technology, drive a green industrial revolution is a really strong plan. It's strong both for economic growth and it's strong for what it will do for us in terms of climate change. So I think there is actually quite common sense solutions out there that Rishi isn't taking that, maybe we'd see from more pragmatic centrist stories like yourself, Felix.
Thank you, Owen. Sarah?
I mean, in response to you, Owen, I think if you're looking for good governance, you shouldn't look in the Conservative Party.
Yeah, generally, yeah.
But so I've kind of got mixed opinions about this because I kind of thought in the first leadership contest of this year for the Conservative Party, I was kind of favouring Liz Truss because ultimately Liz Truss would create so much chaos that a general election would come about sooner. And I've kind of been proved right in the fact that that there's been so much chaos. So I'm kind of disappointed that there's no general election, but of course the Tories want to hold on to their jobs as long as possible. So I think out of the Conservatives, Rishi Sunak is probably the best person to deal with climate change in the next 2 years. But ultimately I think that the policies would be relatively similar across the party, kind of not enough essentially. So I think that potentially Rishi Sunak's the best of a bad bunch, but there's not a lot in it.
Interesting. James, would you agree? I mean, it is important to remember, actually, that our Conservative government is a lot more green than a lot of other Conservative parties across the globe. And that's not saying they're doing a good job. That's up for you and the listeners to decide. And compared to other centre-right or more right-wing parties across the globe, the Conservatives are one of the most green. James?
Well, I think, ironically enough, out of all this, I think Boris Johnson was surprising, at least rhetoric-wise, was more one of the more greener Tories. However, much like basically everything with his government, it was a lot of talk and not a lot of actually governing. So I do think Rishi is probably, as has been said, the best of a, let's be honest, very bad bunch. At this point, we're really at the dregs of the Tory party that are left, kind of thing, after 12 years of being in government. I do think Rishi could be the best, but I do think equally he could also be not great for it, in the sense that the Tories have been polling so badly recently. There's an argument to be made that Rishi needs to go back and try to appeal to the real Tory base kind of thing. A Tory base who aren't big fat, even if they believe that climate change is a real thing, don't really think that money should be prioritised there over other things kind of thing. The real Tory base are not prone to that sort of, climate change action. So I think there is a chance that if the Tory poll numbers stay where they are, which I'm sure the entire panel hopes that they do, I do fear that Rishi might try and make a move, start provoking, like Liz Truss did with the whole unbanning fracking and all that rubbish. Try and appeal to that sort of voter who doesn't really care much about climate change, because that is sort of the Tory base and they need all the votes they can get at the next election, and that's a easy way to point score with their base.
That's an interesting point, James. And although I'm not going to let you respond to me because of time constraints, I do apologise this, but is it not the case, and this is a rhetorical question, is it not the case that actually the Tory base, those sort of core solid Tories, are actually smaller in number than the median voter that does care about climate change, and for Rishi Sunak to try and win over more support, he maybe should be a little bit more greener? I apologise, I won't let you respond to that, but I'll hear what you have to say in the break and do mull that over at home. So when we talked about COP26 on the radio on The Big Picture last year, I made a little pun to get a Take That song, and I'm going to do it again because some of the best puns are to be used again. So if we don't do enough, I suppose we will be relighting a fire.
This is URN.
Hello and welcome back to The Big Picture. We're live on University Radio Nottingham with Felix Hawes. Well, our final topic, we're going to be going over to the Middle East, or Europe, if you're a fan of Eurovision. It's Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu is back as the Prime Minister. So, a little bit of history here. So, Benjamin Netanyahu was Prime Minister of Israel until, I think, last year, when a coalition of parties replaced him in government. But this was a coalition of parties that you wouldn't normally suspect to be joined forces. You had a right-wing, very strongly pro-Israel, pro-Jewish Israel party in government with a party that was more secular and centrist. And surprise, surprise, that coalition didn't quite work out. You had members from both sides resigning. There was a member of the government that resigned over a law that would contradict Passover and what you were allowed to bring into hospitals during Passover. And you had another one that resigned from the other perspective, saying that there was two hardline positions on introducing Israeli law into parts of the West Bank, I believe. So Benjamin Netanyahu is back. There's been, I think, 5 elections in the past 3 years in Israel, so it's very politically unstable. Benjamin Netanyahu's party, I think, are 1 seat short from getting a majority. Correct me if I'm wrong, panel, if you know otherwise. But it does look like Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be the Prime Minister. But for how long, we don't know. There was hope for those that advocate stronger rights for Palestinians about the new government, as Benjamin Netanyahu is quite hardline on Israel. But this is obviously a very sensitive topic to a lot of different people and a lot of different students. So we will tread carefully on this one. But Owen, what do you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's return to Israeli politics?
Well, I probably like to start of asterixing all of what I say with a quote. A friend of mine who is Jewish and who's got family in Israel and he goes very frequently, he told me, and he said, "I know a hell of a lot more than you do about Israeli politics, and I know nothing. So be very careful, because most of what you say could easily be wrong." So I'm going to asterisk all of what I say with that I'm no expert on Israeli-Palestine politics, but unlike Sarah, who I'm sure is going to come in and tell me all that I think is wrong. But yeah, generally, on a general context note, it is such an insanely messy situation that we have had. It's 5 elections in 4 years, I think, and just the chaos that seems to be ensuing there with that politically is, a real mess. And I don't know if I hope under this government, but I hope generally there is a chance of stability there. But yeah, I'd say I am. Don't worry, Sarah. I am worried about the situation. I think the thing that worries me the most is who is, maybe not necessarily Netanyahu himself, even though I can totally see there's reason for worry there, but who it is that's putting him in power. So actually, I think it's Jewish Power, apparently, is the translation of the 3rd biggest party. I'm not super sure, but correct me if I'm wrong. But I think they've got 14 seats now. But the head of that party, in the past, has been incited for things like stirring up racial violence. I think indicted for terrorist attacks. And he's vying for the job, which is basically the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman's job. And we thought she was bad. That in itself, I think, is quite worrying. Putting someone in, and it seems like he might be able to avoid doing that, but I think that is a crucial part of his power base now, that it is a very, very far-right group that is, extremist in its views, but particularly probably quite violent and racist in its views, I think is worrying. And if there's a chance that they're actually going to take charge in this new government of policing and of domestic security, I think things are going to get messy, is what I'd say.
All right, thank you. And I would agree with your statement of as host as well about putting everything under the fact that this is a very complicated issue and there are a lot of different parties that come and go in Israel, and it's very difficult to know precisely what everybody thinks. So yes, Sarah, you are you have quite strong opinions on this issue. What do you make of Benjamin Netanyahu's return as Prime Minister?
I do have quite strong opinions on this issue. And I think to some extent for Palestinians, it doesn't matter who the Prime Minister of Israel is. The conditions are always going to be appalling, so long as this kind of mentality continues. Although saying that, the former Prime Minister did advocate somewhat of a two-state solution. So then that's kind of a bit better. But now with Netanyahu, and also, as Owen referenced, the leader of the third biggest party, they advocated, I think, the full annexation of the West Bank a few years ago, which is frankly terrifying, particularly for Palestinians. So yeah, I think it's quite a scary time for Israeli politics.
Yeah, and that is an interesting point there about what do we actually expect to happen to territories under Palestinian rule. James, what do you think to this?
I echo the rest of the panel. I think it is a very scary and worrying time in Israeli politics. The people that Netanyahu is having to make a coalition with to form a government are very right wing. I think this is being called the most right wing Israeli government ever. You know, these are people who have been, charged with inciting racial hatred and stuff like that. These are worrying people, and as Owen said, the leaders of these groups are going for jobs like security minister. I think one of them wants to be a minister of defense. It's these are the very security focused jobs. Being potentially led by people who have very hard-line views on security issues. So it is very, very worrying. I also think quite interesting is that Netanyahu is, I believe, still under investigation for charges of corruption, fraud, bribery, and I think all of the coalition parties have agreed that they're going to pass laws to make sure that he won't actually be charged, that he'll be immune while he's Prime Minister. So I think that is also another dynamic to be worried about, that this, again, a Prime Minister who potentially, he hasn't been, confirmed yet, but potentially is extremely corrupt, being completely immune from any prosecution is another very worrying dynamic. I do think that, I don't think that this will solve the Israeli political crisis that has been going on since, the past few years. I think, though Netanyahu in the past has been good at keeping these massive coalitions together, at the same time, he was unsuccessful in doing that, and that's the reason there's been 5 elections, or however many there's been in recent years. And I do think, again, there is a high likelihood that this coalition eventually collapses again through some issue. And then I think, honestly, the most likely outcome is in another year time, in next year's radio show, we'll be talking about another Israeli election, I'm pretty sure.
And that's the thing. I mean, what's going to happen? There has been an increase in parties that are more hardline on pro-Israel and anti-Palestine parties is getting increasing support, where if Benjamin Netanyahu's party loses support, where does that support go? It could go either way, I suppose, to those to parties that are pro finding a solution to end the crisis with Palestine, and others that are wanting to make it more hard line. So it's going to be one to watch, and it is a very unstable country. And regarding sort of international response to Israel, Australia has moved the embassy, the Israeli embassy, back to Tel Aviv from Jerusalem, and the United Kingdom government, there was some suggestion, I think, if I'm not mistaken, under Liz Truss, that she might look into moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but Rishi Sunak has confirmed that the embassy, there's no plans to move it from Tel Aviv. This has been The Big Picture. Thank you very much to Sarah, Owen and James for coming on, and Owen's first time. It's been lovely to have you. Owen, would you like to say anything about the debate society that you run?
Well, first and foremost, it's an apolitical society, so all views my own. Should have started with that. Yeah, we meet every Wednesday and Thursday. We have general sessions on Wednesdays and advanced training on Thursdays. Our sort of vision is that we're just quite a social society where people get the chance to meet other people who have good chats of not always politics, but then gain a lot of confidence whilst they do it. So, yeah, please come along. We'd love to see you there. You'd be really welcome.
Thank you, Owen. And thank you to our regular listeners, George Scotland's aunt, my parents, Ella, and to the housemates of Beeston, Lucy, who's listening today, and I hope that she's managed to get a lot of work done whilst listening to us. Thank you to everyone for listening to The Big Picture. We'll be back at 5 o'clock next week, and we're going to end with celebration in honour of one of our regular panellists and Sarah's housemate, Daniel, who celebrated his birthday yesterday. So happy birthday to Daniel. Thank you very much for listening.